Imagine being told you're too old to contribute, dismissed after years of loyal service. Now imagine using that very dismissal as fuel to orchestrate the ultimate comeback, buying the company that fired you. This isn't just a story about getting even. It's about transforming perceived weakness into undeniable power and proving that experience is an asset, not a lie. Have you ever been made to feel obsolete? Like your years of hard work, your accumulated wisdom, your proven track record suddenly meant nothing because you didn't fit someone's narrow vision of what valuable looks like. Maybe you've watched younger, less experienced people get promoted over you. Maybe you've heard the whispers about fresh perspectives and new energy that really mean you're too old and we want you gone. Maybe you've felt the sting of being invisible in meetings, your contributions dismissed, your expertise ignored. Age discrimination is one of the last acceptable prejudices in the workplace. We celebrate diversity and inclusion, but somehow it's still okay to decide someone's worth based on how many birthdays they've had. We've created a culture that worships youth and treats experience like it's a burden instead of an asset. But here's what the age discriminators don't understand. When you dismiss someone with decades of experience, you're not just losing an employee, you're creating an enemy who knows every weakness in your armor, every vulnerability in your business, every mistake you're about to make, because they've already seen it happen before. This is the story of Robert Chen, a man who spent 24 years building a company from the inside, only to be discarded by an arrogant young CEO who confused a fancy MBA with actual competence. A man who was told he was too old, too slow, too stuck in his ways to contribute to the new vision. That CEO made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought he was firing a has-been, clearing out dead weight, making room for innovation. What he actually did was create his own worst nightmare. Because Robert didn't just get angry. He didn't just sue or complain or fade away into bitter retirement. He did something far more devastating. He bought the entire company out from under the man who fired him. By the time you finish this story, you'll understand why underestimating people based on age isn't just morally wrong. It's strategically stupid. You'll see how patience, experience, and strategic thinking can triumph over arrogance and short-term thinking. And if you've ever been counted out, written off, or told you're past your prime, you're about to feel incredibly vindicated. Robert Chen's alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., just like it had for the past 24 years. Not 5:45, not 6 o'clock, 5:47. It was a quirk his wife Elena had long since stopped questioning. Robert had calculated years ago that 5:47 gave him exactly enough time to shower, dress, make coffee, scan the morning tech news, and arrive at the Tech Vantage Solutions office by 7:15, a full 45 minutes before anyone else. Those early morning hours, when the office was quiet and the phones weren't ringing, were when he did his best work. At 58, Robert was the kind of employee companies claim to value, but increasingly discard. He wasn't flashy. He didn't self-promote or play off his politics. He simply showed up day after day, year after year, and made things work. Tech Vantage Solutions provided enterprise software solutions for mid-sized manufacturing companies. Not sexy, not cutting edge, but profitable and stable. Robert had been there since the beginning. Employee number 7, hired by the founder Martin Holt back when the company operated out of a converted warehouse with terrible heating and cheaper furniture. Robert's official title was Senior Vice President of Client Services, but that barely scratched the surface of what he actually did. He was the institutional memory, the crisis solver, the person everyone went to when something was truly broken. When the entire system crashed during a major client presentation in 2015, it was Robert who'd rebuilt the demo environment from scratch in 90 minutes, saving a $3 million account. When their largest client threatened to leave over a billing dispute in 2018, it was Robert who'd personally flown to Detroit, spent 2 days reviewing their concerns, and restructured the contract in a way that actually increased revenue while making the client happy. He knew every major client personally, not just the executives, but the IT manager and the operational staff who actually used Tech Vantage's software. He knew their pain points, their company cultures, their upcoming needs before they did. He'd been to their kids' graduation, sent congratulations on promotion, remembered details that turned business relationships into genuine partners. His technical knowledge was encyclopedic. He'd learned to code in the early days out of necessity, and while he didn't write production code anymore, he could read it. understand it, and discuss architecture with the engineering team in detail. He understood both the business side and the technical side, a rare combination that made him invaluable translating between departments. The younger employees loved him. Robert had personally mentored at least 30 people over the years, teaching them not just the technical aspects of the job, but the soft skills that don't get taught in college. How to read a client's mood, how to deliver bad news, how to push back on unrealistic demands while maintaining relationships. Every Friday, Robert brought donuts, not expensive artisanal ones, just regular donuts from the shop near his house. It was a small gesture, but people noticed. They gathered in the break room, and Robert would make his terrible dad jokes, ask about people's families, create moments of human connection in an increasingly impersonal corporate environment. He wasn't perfect. He could be stubborn about processes he believed in. He sometimes took too long to make decisions because he wanted to consider every angle. He wasn't great at the performative aspects of modern corporate life, the flashy presentations, the social media presence, the personal branding. But he was rock solid, reliable, competent, the kind of person you could build a company on. His calendar was a masterpiece of efficiency. Color-coded blocks for client calls, internal meetings, strategic planning time, and office hours when anyone could drop by his desk with questions. He responded to emails within 2 hours every time. His project completion rate was 97%, highest in the company. Robert's performance reviews had been exemplary for 2 decades straight. Phrases like invaluable asset, cornerstone of client relations, exemplary leadership appeared year after year. His salary was good, but not extravagant, $180,000, which was actually below market rate for someone with his expertise and impact. He'd never pushed for more because he wasn't motivated primarily by money. He was motivated by doing good work and being part of something he'd helped build. His desk was organized, but personal. Photos of Elena, their 2 adult children, and 3 grandchildren. A small plant his daughter had given him that he'd somehow kept alive for 6 years. A coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest VP," that a mentee had given him as a joke. A signed baseball from a client who'd scored company box seats at a game they'd attended together. This was Robert's life. Not glamorous, not Instagram-worthy, but meaningful, productive, valuable. He took pride in his work, in the relationships he'd built, in the company he'd helped to grow from 7 employees to over 200. TechVantage wasn't just his employer. It was his legacy, his contribution, the place where he'd spent the prime years of his career. He believed in loyalty. He believed that if you did good work, if you showed up and contributed and cared, you'd be valued and respected. He was about to learn how dangerously naive that belief was. Marcus Holt was 32 years old and convinced he was a genius. He'd earned an MBA from Wharton, worked 2 years at a prestigious consulting firm where he'd made PowerPoint presentations about digital transformation, and then convinced his father Martin to retire early and hand him the CEO position at TechVantage. Martin, tired after 30 years of building and running the company, had agreed. He wanted to travel with his wife, play golf, enjoy the fruits of his labor, and Marcus was his son. Smart, educated, ambitious. It seemed natural. It was a catastrophic mistake. Marcus had inherited his father's company, but none of his father's wisdom. Martin had built TechVantage through relationships, reliability, and deep understanding of his clients' needs. He'd grown slowly and sustainably, prioritizing long-term stability over short-term flash. Marcus found this approach embarrassingly outdated. He'd arrived with big ideas, most of them borrowed from tech startups he'd read about in business journals. Never mind that TechVantage wasn't a startup. It was a mature B2B software company serving conservative manufacturing clients. Marcus was determined to disrupt something, anything, even if it didn't need disrupt. His first move was a complete rebrand. Out went the professional, understated TechVantage logo and color scheme. In came something that looked like a Silicon Valley startup had thrown up on their marketing materials. Aggressive colors, edgy fonts, a new tagline, disrupting enterprise solution. It cost $400,000 and confused every single existing client. Next came the office redesign. Marcus hated the traditional office setup with its cubicles and private offices for senior staff. He'd read that open floor plans and collaborative spaces drove innovation. So he spent another $600,000 ripping out walls, installing standing desks, creating breakout spaces, with beanbag chairs and foosball tables. The result was an environment where nobody could concentrate. Phone calls disturbed everyone, and the foosball table was used exactly 3 times, all by Marcus. But the most destructive changes were in hiring and personnel. Marcus had a clear vision of what a modern tech company should look like: young, energetic, diverse in the demographic checkbox sense, but remarkably uniform in thought. He wanted digital natives, people who'd grown up with smartphones, who understood social media, who could code in the latest trendy frameworks. Never mind that TechVantage's software was built on stable, mature technologies that required deep expertise. Never mind that their clients valued consistency and experience over trendy innovation. Marcus wanted his company to look like the startups he admired. So he started hiring 20-somethings fresh out of college, offered inflated salaries to work on innovation initiatives that had no clear business case. A chief innovation officer who was 27 and whose primary qualification seemed to be that he'd worked at a startup that failed spectacularly but got a lot of press coverage. A director of social media engagement, because apparently enterprise software companies selling to manufacturing firms desperately needed a stronger Instagram presence. A culture consultant who organized mandatory fun activities and posted motivational quotes in the bathroom. Meanwhile, raises for existing employees were frozen. Budget constraints, Marcus explained in a company-wide email, apparently unaware of the irony given his spending spree. He started making comments in meetings when senior employees like Robert would raise concerns based on experience. Marcus would smile condescendingly and say things like, "I appreciate the historical perspective, but we need to think differently for the modern marketplace." When a 52-year-old account manager struggled with a new software tool Marcus had mandated, he'd said loudly enough for others to hear, "This is exactly why we need fresh blood. People who don't have to be retrained out of old habits." He started using phrases like legacy employees and heritage workforce, terms that sounded neutral. Everyone understood meant old and in the way. In his first year, Marcus pushed out 7 employees over 45, always with excuses: position eliminated, restructuring, skill set mismatch. Never explicitly about age, because that would be illegal. But the pattern was obvious to anyone paying attention. The younger employees he'd hired thought Marcus was brilliant. He was charismatic, spoke their language, made them feel like they were part of something revolutionary. They didn't notice that revenue was stagnant, that client satisfaction scores were declining, that the experienced employees who actually knew how to run the business were disappearing. Marcus saw himself as Steve Jobs, disrupting an industry stuck in the past. In reality, he was a child playing with a toy he didn't understand, breaking things his father had spent 30 years building. And Robert Chen was about to become his biggest target. The meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. on a Friday. That should have been Robert's first warning. Nothing good ever happens in a 4 p.m. Friday meeting. It's a coward's time slot, late enough that the person being fired can be escorted out when most employees have left, early enough that HR can process the paperwork before the weekend. But Robert, ever diligent, showed up to Marcus's office precisely on time, carrying a notebook and assuming this was about the quarterly client review he'd prepared. Marcus's office had been transformed from Martin's comfortable book-lined space into something that looked like a tech magazine spread. Glass desk, ergonomic chair that probably cost more than Robert's first car, enormous monitor displaying real-time analytics that Marcus definitely didn't understand, motivational posters with words like disrupt and innovate in aggressive typography. Marcus was sitting back in his chair, fingers steepled, trying to project authority. Next to him sat Jennifer from HR, her expression carefully neutral, and a security guard Robert didn't recognize standing by the door. That's when Robert knew. "Robert, thanks for coming," Marcus began, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'll get right to it because I respect you too much to waste your time with small talk." A lie. Marcus had never respected Robert. Robert could see it in every dismissive glance, every interrupted sentence, every condescending smile over the past 18 months. "We're restructuring the client services division," Marcus continued, using the practiced language he'd clearly rehearsed. "We're moving in a new direction, focusing on digital-first client engagement strategy and building a team with different skill sets more aligned with our future vision." Robert said nothing, just watched. He'd been in business long enough to recognize corporate euphemism. After careful consideration, Marcus went on, gaining confidence from Robert's silence. We've decided that your position is being eliminated. We appreciate your many years of service to TechVantage, but we need to build a team for the modern marketplace. Someone with your tenure might find it challenging to adapt to the rapid changes we're implementing. There it was. Tenure, the polite word for old. My performance reviews have been exemplary, Robert said calmly. I've maintained a 97% client retention rate. I brought in $4.2 million in new business last year alone. What specifically about my performance is deficient? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. This isn't about performance in the traditional metric. It's about fit. It's about having team members who can move at the speed of modern business, who understand digital native approaches, who can bring fresh energy and perspective. Fresh energy, digital native. The euphemisms were piling up, each one a barely disguised reference to age. I see, Robert said quietly. And you believe that my tenure, makes me incapable of these things? I didn't say age, Marcus replied quickly, a flash of concern crossing his face. Jennifer from HR leaned forward slightly, alert to the legal danger. This is about skill sets and cultural fit. We need people who can adapt rapidly, who are comfortable with constant change, who can pivot with market demands. I've adapted to every major technology shift in this industry for 24 years, Robert pointed out. I learned 6 different programming languages, transitioned our client base through 4 major product evolutions, and personally managed the integration during our merger with DataSync in 2019. What specific adaptation am I incapable? Marcus's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already decided to dismiss. Robert, I'm not going to sit here and debate this, his veneer of politeness cracking. The decision has been made by executive leadership. Your position is eliminated effective immediately. You'll receive 4 weeks severance, more than generous given company policy. Continuation of health benefits for 60 days, and your accrued PTO will be paid out. 4 weeks severance for 24 years of service. Martin had given the janitor more when he retired. We'll need your badge, your laptop, and any company materials, Jennifer said, speaking for the first time, her voice professionally sympathetic but firm. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal items. We've already forwarded your personal email access, so you'll have your contacts. It was all so efficient, so pre-planned. They decided to erase him before he ever walked into this room. Robert sat there for a moment, processing. 24 years. He'd given this company the best years of his career. He'd sacrificed family dinners for client emergencies. He'd worked through holidays, weekends, his daughter's dance recitals. He'd turned down job offers that paid more because he believed in loyalty. And this was what loyalty earned you. A Friday afternoon, firing by someone young enough to be your son, who'd contributed a fraction of what you had, but sat in judgment anyway. You're making a mistake, Robert said finally, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. Not about firing me. That's your prerogative. But you're making a mistake about how you think business works. You believe youth and buzzwords equal innovation. You think experience is a liability instead of an asset. You're wrong, and this company will suffer. Marcus actually laughed. With all due respect, Robert, I think I'll trust my Wharton MBA and my vision for TechVantage's future over the perspective of someone who's been doing the same job since the 1990s. That contempt, that casual dismissal, that absolute certainty that age meant obsolescence. Robert stood slowly. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside. Not sadness, anger. Something colder and far more dangerous. Clarity. I hope you know what you're doing, Robert said quietly. I do, Marcus replied, with complete confidence. I'm building the future. The security guard stepped forward. Robert walked to his desk in a daze, aware of colleagues watching with pity and fear. Fear that they might be next. He packed his personal items into a cardboard box. The photos, the plant, the coffee mug, the signed baseball. 24 years reduced to objects that fit in one box. The walk to his car was the longest of his life. But as he sat behind the wheel, hands shaking, staring at that cardboard box, something crystallized. Marcus thought he'd eliminated a problem. He'd actually created one. Robert sat in his car in the TechVantage parking lot for 20 minutes before he trusted himself to drive. The humiliation was physical, a weight pressing on his chest. He kept replaying the meeting, Marcus's condescending tone, the security escort, the looks from colleagues he'd mentored and trained, people he'd worked alongside for years, watching him be discarded like defective equipment. The drive home was automatic. He barely remembered it later. Elena was in the kitchen when he walked in, took one look at his face and the cardboard box, and knew. They fired you. Restructuring, Robert said, his voice hollow. My position was eliminated. I'm not digital native enough, apparently. Not fresh energy enough. Too much tenure. Those bastards. Elena's fury was instant and fierce. She'd been a corporate lawyer before retiring, and she recognized age discrimination when she heard it. Robert, that's illegal. You can sue. I'll make some calls. I know. Robert set the box down on the kitchen table, stared at it. My lawyer already called. 3 other people have contacted him. Apparently, I'm the 4th person over 45 that Marcus has pushed out this. We have a case. Then we fight it. For what? Robert looked up at his wife. A settlement. My job back, working for someone who made it clear he has no respect for me. Sitting in that office every day knowing I had to sue my way back in. Elena was quiet, recognizing the truth. And over the weekend, Robert's phone didn't stop. Former colleagues calling to express outrage. Clients, his clients, people he'd worked with for years, calling to ask what happened and expressing shock. Several mentioned they'd already noticed a decline in service quality under Marcus's new team. Tom Brewster from Midland Manufacturing, a client Robert had personally landed 8 years ago, was particularly blunt. Robert, I'm going to be honest with you. The only reason we're still with TechVantage is because of you. That kid Marcus sent to our last quarterly review didn't know his ass from his elbow, called our production system legacy infrastructure, like it was a bad thing. It's a $50 million system that works perfectly. We don't need disruption, we need reliability. Without you there, I don't know how long we'll stay. That conversation planted something in Robert's mind. He started researching, late nights while Elena slept. He dug into TechVantage's financials, the public-facing ones available through industry filings and investor reports. The company was privately held, but had outside investors who required regular reporting. What he found was fascinating. Marcus's expensive initiatives, the rebrand, the office redesign, the inflated salaries for inexperienced staff, had created significant cash flow problems. Revenue was flat, despite Marcus's claims of millennial aggressive growth strategy. Several major contracts were up for renewal in the next 6 months, and Robert knew from his client contacts that those relationships were rocky. The company's private stock, which was held by outside investors and employee stock options from the early days, had been quietly trading at decreased valuation. Investors were nervous. Robert knew something Marcus didn't. TechVantage was vulnerable. Tuesday night, 5 days after being fired, Robert couldn't sleep. He went to his home office, pulled out a legal pad, and started calculating. His severance, $28,000 after taxes. Savings, $145,000. 401k, $680,000. But early withdrawal penalties would be brutal. Home equity, roughly $300,000 if they mortgaged. Total liquid assets if he liquidated everything, maybe $950,000. Not even close to enough to buy a company valued at $45, $50 million. But then he started thinking different. What if the company wasn't worth $45 million anymore? What if Marcus's mismanagement had dropped the real value significantly? What if the outside investors were spooked enough to sell at a discount? What if Robert didn't need to buy the whole company, just enough shares to control it? He pulled up TechVantage's ownership structure, information he had from his years in senior leadership. Marcus owned 51% through inheritance from his father. The remaining 49% was split among 3 angel investors from the early days, 15% total. A small private equity firm, 12%. Employee stock options, mostly held by early employees, 22%. If Robert could buy enough of that 49% and convince shareholders to vote with it, he could force changes, maybe even force Marcus out. The audacity of it almost made him laugh. But the more he thought about it, the more possible it seemed. He had relationships with many of the employee stockholders, people Marcus had alienated or forced out. He'd worked with the angel investors for years. They knew him and respected him. The PE firm would follow the money. If Robert could demonstrate he'd run the company better than Marcus, they'd back him. At 3 a.m., Robert wrote a single sentence on his legal pad. I'm not going to sue Marcus. I'm going to buy him out. When Elena came down at 6 a.m. and found him still at his desk, surrounded by financial documents and calculations, she read that sentence and looked at her husband. That's crazy, she said. I know. It's audacious and risky and could bankrupt him. I know. We'd have to mortgage the house, cash out retirement, risk everything. I know. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you need from me? Robert looked at his wife. his partner of 33 years, who'd supported every career move, every risk, every dream. "Your trust," he said, "and maybe your old corporate law contact." Elena sat down next to him, pulled the legal pad over, and started making notes. "Let's destroy this arrogant little punk," she said. Robert spent the first week after his termination doing something he'd never really done before. Nothing. Or at least, appearing to do nothing. He slept in. He took long walks. He met former colleagues for coffee and commiserated about Marcus's leadership. He played with his grandchildren. To anyone watching, he looked like a newly unemployed man processing his situation, maybe a little lost. Certainly not a threat. But Robert's mind was never quiet. Every coffee meeting was intelligence gathering. Every conversation with a former colleague revealed another piece of information. Which clients were unhappy, which employees were planning to leave, which systems were failing because the institutional knowledge was gone. He learned that the major integration project with Precision Auto Parts, a $6 million account, was 3 months behind schedule because the young project manager Marcus had assigned didn't understand the client's manufacturing constraints. Robert had personally managed that relationship for 12 years. He knew their systems intimately. He learned that Marcus had burned through $2.3 million in the past year on innovation initiatives that had produced exactly zero revenue. He learned that the CFO, a competent woman named Patricia, who'd worked with Robert for 15 years, was quietly updating her resume because she couldn't stomach Marcus's financial recklessness. Every piece of information was a weapon. Robert was building an arsenal. The second week, he started making different kinds of calls. First, David Park, one of the original angel investors who'd backed Martin Holt 30 years ago. David was 71, semi-retired, and had watched Marcus's tenure with increasing concern. "Robert," David said warmly when he answered, "I heard what happened. Absolute disgrace. Martin would be furious if he..." They met for lunch. Robert didn't pitch anything, just listen. David vented about Marcus's lack of financial discipline, his dismissal of proven strategy, his arrogance. "The quarterly reports are concerning," David admitted. "We're not growing. Expenses are up 40%, but revenue is flat. I've raised concerns, but Marcus dismisses everything as investment in future growth. I'm not convinced." "What would it take for you to sell your stake?" Robert asked casually. David looked at him sharply. "Why?" "Hypothetically." "Hypothetically?" David leaned back, studying Robert. "I paid $150,000 for 5% of the company back in 1995. Current valuation puts my stake at about $2.5 million. But honestly, if someone offered me $2 million cash right now, I'd take it. The trajectory worries me, and I'm too old to wait out a turnaround that may never come." Robert filed that away. 5% for $2 million. High, but doable if he could put together the right partnership. Next, Lisa Hernandez and James Chen, no relation. 2 other early employees who'd been forced out by Marcus and still held stock options totaling 8% of the company. Both were angry. Both felt betrayed. Both were motivated by more than just money. They wanted to see Marcus. "If I told you I was putting together a group to acquire controlling interest in TechVantage," Robert said carefully, "and if I told you the plan was to remove Marcus and restore competent leadership, would you be interested in selling your shares as part of that effort?" Lisa didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. What do you need?" Third, the private equity firm, Cascade Partners, which held 12%. Robert called his contact there, Monica Stevens, a managing partner he'd worked with on the DataSync merger. "Monica, I need to ask you something confidential. How does Cascade feel about TechVantage's current performance?" There was a long pause. "Robert, you know I can't discuss." "I'm not asking for insider information. I'm asking how you'd feel about a change in leadership, a return to the fundamentals that made TechVantage successful in the first place." Another pause. "Are you proposing what I think you're proposing?" "I'm exploring options." "Robert, and this is purely hypothetical, if someone were to approach us with a serious acquisition offer backed by credible business leadership, we'd evaluate it on its merits. We're not thrilled with current management. Marcus is spending money like a startup while running a mature B2B company. The fundamentals don't match the strategy. What would a serious offer look like?" "Fair market value for our 12%, which we'd peg at about $6 million given recent performance concerns. But we'd need to see a credible business plan, proof of financing, and confidence that new leadership could actually turn things around." Robert crunched numbers that night, based on his conversation. David Park's 5%, $2 million. Lisa and James's combined 8%. They'd sell for $3 million. Cascade's 12%, $6 million. Total, 25% of the company for $11 million. Still not controlling interest. He'd need 51% to force Marcus out. That meant finding another 26% somewhere. The problem was, Marcus owned 51% outright. The remaining shares were scattered among smaller employee stockholders, and tracking them all down would be difficult. Unless Robert pulled up the company bylaws, documents he'd helped revise 10 years ago. There was a clause, buried in section 14.3, about votes of no confidence. If shareholders representing 40% of non-controlling stock voted for new leadership, the board was required to hold a formal CEO review. It wasn't a direct path to acquisition, but it was leverage. Robert made more calls. Over 3 weeks, he contacted every single employee stockholder. Many had been forced out like him. Others were still at the company, but miserable. A few were loyal to Marcus, but not many. By week 4, Robert had commitment. David Park, 5% willing to sell or vote for leadership change. Lisa Hernandez, 4% willing to sell. James Chen, 4% willing to sell. Cascade Partners, 12% willing to sell with conditions. 11 other employee stockholders, combined 9%, mix of selling and voting support. Total, 34% committed, with another 8% possible if he could close a few more holdouts. He needed financing. His $950,000 in liquid assets wasn't nearly enough. That's when Elena made the crucial call to her former law school roommate, Catherine Wu, who'd gone into private equity and now ran a boutique investment firm specializing in management buyout. Robert pitched Catherine over a 3-hour dinner. He laid out TechVantage's fundamental business strength, the damage Marcus had done, the specific clients ready to leave without proper leadership, his detailed turnaround plan, the committed shareholders, the pathway to control. Catherine listened, asked piercing questions, and reviewed his number. "This is insane," she said finally. Robert's heart sank. "It's insane," she repeated, "and I love it. You're essentially executing a hostile takeover of the company that fired you for being too old, using institutional knowledge they were dumb enough to let walk out the door." She smiled. "My firm will put up $8 million for a 25% equity stake in the restructured company. You'll need to find the rest, but this should give you credibility for additional backers." Robert had his anchor investor. The transformation from fired employee to corporate raider was complete. Now came the hard part, actually pulling it off. The next 8 weeks were the most intense of Robert's life. Everything had to be done quietly. If Marcus got even a hint that Robert was buying up shares, he could take defensive measures, call in favors, restructure ownership, find a white knight investor. The element of surprise was crucial. Robert operated like he was running a covert operation, because in a sense, he was. He set up meetings in coffee shops far from TechVantage's office. He used his personal email. Never anything that could be traced back to corporate system. He paid a lawyer to handle the actual share purchase agreements through a shell company, Chen Holdings LLC, that gave no indication of who was actually behind it. The legal work was intricate. Elena's old contacts proved invaluable. They structured the purchases carefully, staying just below the threshold that would trigger disclosure requirements. Each transaction was clean, documented, but quiet. David Park sold his 5% stake for $2 million. The paperwork was handled through lawyers, signed digitally, transferred without fanfare. Lisa Hernandez and James Chen sold their combined 8% for $3.2 million. Both were enthusiastic about the plan, but Robert swore them to absolute secrecy. "If Marcus finds out, this all falls apart," he warned. Cascade Partners was more complicated. Monica Stevens needed board approval, which meant more people knowing about the potential deal, but she positioned it carefully. "We're divesting from an underperforming asset to a credible buyer offering fair market value." Her board approved the sale of their 12% stake for $6 million, with one condition. Robert had to prove he had a viable path to control and a solid business plan. Robert spent 2 weeks crafting a 47-page turnaround strategy. It detailed cost reductions from eliminating Marcus's wasteful innovation spending, revenue recovery from stabilizing client relationship, operational improvements from reinstating experienced leadership, 18-month financial projections showing a path to 30% revenue growth. Catherine W.'s investment committee reviewed it and committed their $8 million for preferred shares and a board seat in the restructured company. But even with all these pieces, Robert only had 25% ownership. He needed 26% more to have controlling interest, or at least enough allied shareholders to force a vote of no confidence. This meant the real work, convincing the scattered employee stockholders one by one. Robert created a spreadsheet tracking every single person who held stock options. There were 37 of them, holding anywhere from 0.1% to 3% each, totaling 22% of the company. He started calling. Some conversations were Rachel Morrison, a former senior developer who'd been pushed out 6 months before Robert, owned 2%. "Are you serious?" she said when Robert explained his plan. "I will sell you my shares for free just to watch that smug little bastard get what's coming to him." Robert paid her fair market value anyway, $900,000. Others were harder. Tim Kowalski, still working at TechVantage and holding 1.5%, was terrified of retaliation. "Robert, if this doesn't work, if Marcus finds out I was involved, I'll lose my job." "Tim, you're going to lose your job anyway," Robert said gently. "You're 53. You've seen the pattern. Marcus is systematically clearing out anyone over 45. It's just a matter of time. But if we do this, if we succeed, you'll have a leadership team that values experience instead of treating it like a liability." Tim sold. The biggest challenge was Alan Brewster, who held 3%, the single largest employee stock position. Alan was 44, still young enough to escape Marcus's purge for now, and he'd been given a promotion recently. He was hesitant. "I don't know, Robert. Things aren't perfect, but I have a mortgage, kids in college. I can't afford to rock the boat." "Alan, do you remember who trained you when you started here 12 years ago?" Robert asked. "You did. And do you remember what I told you about integrity? That it's the only thing you own that nobody can take from you. Marcus is running this company into the ground. The clients are leaving. The good people are being forced out. In 2 years, there might not be a company for you to work at, promotion or not. I'm offering you a chance to be part of saving, and I'm offering you $1.4 million for your 3%. That's college tuition paid for, a significant nest egg. But more than that, it's doing the right thing." Alan was quiet for a long time. "What happens to the employees if you take over?" "I bring back competence-based management. I stop the bleeding of experienced talent. I stabilize client relations. I make TechVantage into the company it used to be, where good work is rewarded, regardless of age. I'm in." One by one, Robert built his coalition. Some sold shares outright. Others agreed to vote their shares with Robert in any no-confidence vote. A few, loyal to Marcus or too afraid, refused, but they were the minority. By week 7, Robert had secured 25% direct ownership through purchases. Another 18% committed to vote with him. Total, 43% aligned against Marcus's 51%. Still not enough for outright control, but enough to force a board review under the company bylaws. And Robert had one more card to play. Week 8 brought a near disaster. Marcus's assistant noticed unusual activity in the company's share register. Several employee stockholders requesting transfer paperwork in a short time frame. She mentioned it to Marcus. "Why are people transferring shares?" Marcus asked the CFO, Patricia, in a casual hallway conversation. Patricia, who'd been quietly supportive of Robert's plan, played it cool. "Probably just estate planning, portfolio rebalancing, normal stuff. I can look into it if you want." "Nah, not worth the time," Marcus said dismissive. He was too busy planning his next big initiative to worry about administrative details. The moment passed, but it had been close. Robert accelerated his timeline. He couldn't risk another near miss. The board meeting was scheduled for September 15th, a routine quarterly review. Marcus had no idea it would be anything but. Robert had his financing secured, his shares purchased, his coalition committed, his business plan polished. He had one shot at that. Either he'd pull off the most audacious corporate comeback in company history, or he'd lose everything he'd risked. September 15th couldn't come fast enough. The 48 hours before the board meeting were excruciating. Robert barely slept. He ran through every scenario, every possible complication. What if Marcus had discovered the plan? What if one of the committed shareholders got cold feet? What if the board refused to hear his proposal? Elena caught him at 2 a.m. on September 14th, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, reviewing the presentation for the 100th time. "You've prepared as much as you can," she said gently. "Either it works or it doesn't, but you've done everything right, have I?" Robert looked up at his wife. What if I'm doing this for the wrong reason? What if this is just ego, just revenge, just an old man who can't accept that he's fired? Is that what you think this is? Robert was quiet, really considering the question. "No," he said finally. "This is about proving that experience matters. That you can't just discard people because they've had too many birthdays. That Marcus's way of running the company, the waste, the arrogance, the dismissal of proven strategies, is wrong and destructive. Then you're doing it for the right reason." The morning of September 15th, Robert dressed in his best suit. Not expensive or flashy, just professional and appropriate. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. 8 weeks ago, he'd been a fired employee with a cardboard box of personal items. Now he was about to walk into a boardroom and attempt a takeover. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at TechVantage headquarters. Robert arrived at 1:45, signed in at security as a shareholder attending the quarterly board meeting. Completely legitimate and within his rights. The security guard, the same one who'd escorted him out 8 weeks earlier, did a double take. "Mr. Chen, I didn't expect to see you. I'm a shareholder," Robert said calmly. "I have the right to attend." He walked through the office for the first time since his termination. It looked worse than he remembered. The open floor plan was clearly not working, with employees wearing headphones to block out the noise, the collaboration spaces sitting empty, the foosball table gathering dust. Several former colleagues saw him, and their eyes went wide. A few looked away awkwardly. One, a young developer he'd mentored, mouthed, "What are you doing?" Robert just smiled and kept walking. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor, a space he knew intimately from years of presentation. The board consisted of 7 people: Marcus as CEO, Patricia the CFO, Monica Stevens from Cascade Partner, David Park representing angel investors, and 3 independent directors recruited by Marcus. When Robert walked in, carrying a leather portfolio and a USB drive with his presentation, the room went silent. Marcus was mid-sentence, talking about his latest initiative, something about blockchain integration that made no sense for their business model. He stopped talking, his face cycling rapidly through confusion, annoyance, and then concern. "Robert, what are you doing here?" "Attending the board meeting," Robert said calmly, taking a seat. "I'm a shareholder now. Actually, I'm the 2nd largest shareholder in this company. I believe that gives me the right to be here." "You could have heard a pin drop." Marcus looked at Patricia. What is he talking about? Patricia consulted her papers, though she already knew. According to the most recent share registry, Robert Chen holds 25% of company stock through Chen Holdings LLC. Marcus's face went white. How is that possible?" "I bought shares," Robert said. "Legal purchases from willing sellers. David, Lisa, James, several others. All properly documented and filed." Marcus turned to David Park accusingly. "You sold to him?" "I sold to a buyer who made a fair offer," David said neutrally. "It's my stock. I can sell to whoever I want." Marcus was visibly trying to process, to understand what was happening. "This is some kind of... What are you trying to do?" Robert set his portfolio on the table, looked Marcus directly in the eye, and smiled. "I'm here to remove you as CEO," he said, "and I'm here to buy this company." The room exploded. "This is outrageous." Marcus shot to his feet, his face flushed. "You can't just walk in here and..." "Actually," Robert interrupted calmly, "Section 14.3 of the company bylaws, which you'd know about if you'd ever bothered to read them, states that any shareholder holding more than 15% can call for a vote of no confidence in executive leadership. I hold 25%. I'm calling that vote." One of the independent directors, a corporate attorney named Stephen Walsh, was already pulling up the bylaw on his tablet. "He's right," Stephen said after a moment. "The provision exists. If a qualifying shareholder calls for a vote, the board is required to hear the case and vote." "This is absurd," Marcus sputtered. "I'm the CEO. I own 51% of this company. You own 51%, which gives you control in a standard shareholder vote," Robert. "But a no-confidence vote is different. It's a board vote on leadership competence. Each board member gets 1 vote, regardless of ownership stake. You get 1 vote, just like everyone else at this table." Marcus looked around the table, doing the math. 7 board members, himself, Patricia, Monica, David, and 3 independent directors. He needed 4 votes to survive. "I'd like to present my case," Robert said, connecting his USB drive to the room's presentation system. "If the board would indulge me for 30 minutes. Stephen nodded. "Given the bylaws requirement, I think we're obligated to hear this." What followed was the most important presentation of Robert's life. He started with TechVantage's performance under Marcus's leadership. The numbers were devastating. Revenue growth, 0% over 18 months. Expenses up, 38%. Client satisfaction scores down 22%. Employee turnover, up 45%. 3 major clients, representing $8 million in annual revenue, currently reviewing their contracts with strong likelihood of leaving. This isn't innovation, Robert said quietly. This is mismanagement. He showed Marcus's spending, $2.3 million on initiatives that produced zero return. The expensive rebrand that confused clients, the office redesign that reduced productivity, the inflated salaries for inexperienced staff, while veteran employees were pushed out. Then he showed the opportunity cost. Clients' TechVantage had lost to competitors. Talented employees now working elsewhere. Market opportunities missed. Marcus tried to interrupt several times, but Stephen kept him quiet. He has the floor. You'll get your rebuttal. Robert's next section was more personal but carefully presented. The systematic removal of experienced employees, all over 45, all forced out with pretextual reason that didn't hold up under scrutiny. This isn't just wrong ethically, Robert said. It's stupid strategically. Institutional knowledge is an irreplaceable asset. Client relationships built over decades can't be replicated by enthusiasm and buzzword. Finally, Robert presented his alternative, a detailed turnaround plan showing how restoring experienced leadership, cutting wasteful spending, and refocusing on core competencies could grow revenue 30% in 18 months. I'm not asking the board to give me control out of sympathy or fairness, Robert concluded. I'm asking you to make a business decision. Which leadership is more likely to deliver value? Proven, experienced management with a track record of success, or continued experiments by someone who's demonstrably failed? He sat down. Marcus's rebuttal was emotional and defensive. He talked about his vision, his education, his understanding of where business is going. He accused Robert of being stuck in the past, of not understanding modern market, of orchestrating a hostile takeover based on resentment. But he couldn't address the number. He couldn't explain the declining performance. He couldn't justify the expenses or the failed initiative. When he finished, Stephen called for the vote. All in favor of removing Marcus Holt as CEO and appointing Robert Chen as interim CEO pending a full transition plan? Patricia raised her hand to me. In favor. Monica from Cascade Partners. In favor. David Park. In favor. 3 votes. Robert needed 1 more from the 3 independent directors. Stephen Walsh looked at his fellow independent directors. I've seen enough. Performance numbers speak for themselves. In favor. 4 votes. It was done. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. You can't. The vote is conclusive, Stephen said formally. Marcus, I'm sorry, but effective immediately. You're removed as CEO. Robert Chen is appointed interim CEO. We'll need to work out the specifics of transition and your separation agreement, but this meeting is adjourned. Marcus looked around the table, seeing no allies, no sympathy. The same board that had approved his initiatives for 18 months had just unanimously turned against him. He looked at Robert, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his expression, just shock and the dawning realization of what had just happened. You'll regret this, Marcus said weak. Robert stood, walked over, and extended his hand. I hope someday you learn from it. Marcus didn't take the hand. He grabbed his bag and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the silent boardroom. Robert Chen, the man who'd been fired for being too old 8 weeks earlier, was now CEO of TechVantage Solutions. Robert's first action as CEO wasn't triumphant or vindictive. It was practical. He called Patricia into his office, the same office where Marcus had fired him, and asked for a complete financial review. He needed to know exactly how bad things were before he could fix them. Then he made phone calls to the clients who were considering leaving, personally assuring them that TechVantage was under new management and their concerns would be addressed. To the experienced employees who'd been forced out, offering them their positions back if they wanted them. To the remaining staff, scheduling an all-hands meeting to explain what had happened and where the company was going. Within a week, 3 major clients withdrew their cancellation notices. Within 2 weeks, 5 experienced employees returned, bringing institutional knowledge and client relationships back with them. Within a month, Robert had cut $1.8 million in wasteful spending, while simultaneously improving morale. The turnaround wasn't instant, but it was. More importantly, Robert changed the culture. He made it clear that age, experience, and proven competence would be valued. That innovation was important, but not at the expense of fundamentals. That employees would be judged on performance and contribution, not on fitting someone's narrow demographic vision. 6 months later, TechVantage's revenue was up 18%. Client satisfaction scores had recovered. Employee retention was the highest it had been in 3 years. But this story isn't really about business metrics or corporate takeovers. It's about something deeper. The dangerous myth that youth equals value and age equals obsolescence. We live in a culture obsessed with disruption and innovation, where experience is often treated as a liability instead of an asset, where companies pursue the appearance of being cutting edge rather than the substance of being effective, where people are discarded not because they're failing, but because they've had too many birthdays. It's short-sighted, it's wasteful, and as Marcus learned, it's strategically stupid. Robert's comeback proves something essential. Experience is power. Institutional knowledge, relationships built over decades, wisdom earned through success and failure. These are assets that can't be replicated by enthusiasm or educational. When you underestimate people based on age, you're not just being unfair. You're creating enemies who know your weaknesses better than you know them. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been dismissed or underestimated because of your age? Too young, too old, or anything in between? How did you respond? Did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments. Let's build a community that celebrates second acts, that values resilience, that proves the doubters wrong. And if this story resonated, if you believe that experience matters and that no one should be written off because of a number, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're here to tell the stories that remind us that competence, wisdom, and strategic thinking triumph over arrogance every time. Remember, never confuse age with obsolescence. The most dangerous competitors are the ones you underestimate. The best revenge? Success. The best vindication? Competence.